Hello, and we are live. Welcome back to everybody who's been sticking with Geek News now for a while. I am Cam of Cam and Focus. If you don't know, I have a show on the Geek News Now YouTube channel, also called Cam and Focus, in which I get on and discuss films in a way that enhances the viewing experience. And with me today is published author Alexander Ferrick. Mr. Ferrick, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do.
Hi guys, I'm Alex Ferrick. I'm author of science fiction, fantasy, and sometimes other. And I'm also a law student and some part-time law clerk when I'm not having fun and doing what I want to be doing.
Yeah, I understand that. Sometimes fun to indulge in a bit of leisure is hard to come by, and I mean, especially you're in school and all that. I mean, it's I'm sure it is hard.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So before we, dive into this, discussion about writing and all that, you have recently released some music, haven't you?
I have. In addition to the books and so forth, all in the pen name Alexander Ferrick, I'm also a musician, singer, songwriter, with some colleagues. The band is called The Whales, and the last album is called 1974, and it dropped only a couple of months ago. Everywhere you can stream music, it's there.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I had listened to a bit of it, back whenever it came out on Spotify. It gave me some really nice vibes of maybe Sublime or Grateful Dead or something like that. Very chill and mellow type of music. Would you say that bands like that were kind of your inspiration?
Some of them for sure. I think that Grateful Dead in particular is sort of somewhat of an influence. Big fan of, if you want to reach a little further back, well, maybe not that much further back. Big fan of The Doors. Big fan of Bowie, even though there's not a whole lot of Bowie sounds in that music. Those are some of my influences for sure. And that was the target I was aiming at.
Yeah, would you say that that those are some of your favorite bands, or what genre would you typically say is your favorite to listen to in your free time?
I listen more to sort of like pop punk. It's kind of sad. I never grew out of it, but I spend most of my time with like Fall Out Boy, From Under the Cork Tree. I think if you start my car right now and open my Spotify, you're going to find From Under the Cork Tree is the last thing that was playing. And I know it's not 2007 anymore, but that's still what I'm listening to usually.
Yeah, definitely. How many people play with you whenever you produce your music? Do you have a full band, or is it all self-produced?
It's two people. It's me as the singer, the songwriter, the producer, if you will, and my now late father on the electric guitar and the bass.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. I imagine having him kind of immortalized in that music. It must mean a lot to you.
It does. It was, he's the one that got me playing. He'd been playing since 1969. It was his life and his dream, and a lot of what got me started really wanting to kind of set it into a finished form that could be published was kind of wanting to check that off of his bucket list and have something to remember him by, and have him have the chance to hear it before he, ran out of time. And fortunately, we were able to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have any plans for future releases?
We have quite a bit of unfinished material that remains to be kind of polished up and worked on. So I'd say we've got probably one or two more records worth of stuff that will include fully featuring his performances on it. And then after that, I'll kind of reevaluate once that body of work is finished. I'll look at see where I'm at and how much more music I want to do.
Gotcha. All right. Well, yeah. If any of you have Spotify and you want to check out his work, his band is called The Whales, and the album's called 1974.
Yes, 1974.
All right, definitely check it out. So as far as the writing goes, obviously you're very passionate about it. Are you working on anything currently?
I've got a couple of irons in the fire. They're all kind of a little bit on the back burner. Law school takes a lot of oxygen, a lot of focus. I'm working on a sequel to Aether Storm, which is part of the Songs of Saren, which is my kind of fantasy flagship series. Currently, Aetherstorm and Demon Slayer are the two installments that are released. I'm working on a sequel to Aetherstorm called Skyborn, which is going to kind of look at what Saren looks like after the events of Aetherstorm, and I'm going to try to avoid spoilers. But basically, this Aetherstorm left with the kind of central conflict very resolved, but resolved in a way that left a lot of questions of what was next, and I'm going to kind of try to tackle some of those.
Okay. Now, how many installments do you plan on having in your Songs of Saren series?
Right now, the game plan is roughly 7. I may not be able to hit that target. I'm working on the 3rd. I think 7 is kind of where we're at to get to fully tell the story. And granted, that's 7 stories that are going to encompass, a couple of thousand years of history, with some gaps, some time jumps in the middle.
Yeah.
But that's the plan. The plan is 7.
Okay. Do you have a core line of characters that this long story is going to revolve around, or is each one going to be like, this person here doing this thing and then this person here doing this thing?
It's kind of a mix of both, is where I'm at with it. First of all, the goal when I started writing, and I hope this is true of Aetherstorm and Demon Slayer as they're out now, the idea was that you could pick up any book in the series and not be lost. So from a certain standpoint, you pick up, Demon Slayer. Demon Slayer has one clear protagonist who is in Aetherstorm, but he's not the protagonist of Aetherstorm.
Okay.
And likewise, the protagonists of Aetherstorm are in Demon Slayer, but they're not the protagonists of Demon Slayer. And I think that's they're very interconnected, and they're deeply linked. And so there's one overarching story, but that one overarching story has its baton passed through the hands of multiple kind of lead characters to help tell the broader story.
I gotcha. Now this this universe that you've created, I mean, obviously you put a lot of thought into it. I listened to Aetherstorm, an audiobook. That narrator was fantastic. What has been your favorite thing about building this universe? Because obviously it's very large and intricate. There's a lot of history that you put into it. So what would you say was your favorite part about the process of creating this universe?
I think, to me, my favorite part of the process is also kind of the thing that I look for in stories that I consume, and it's characters. To me, I'm a firm believer that the plot is really character driven. If you've got really good, compelling characters, the plot can tend to sort of write itself because they'll take off on their own.
Yeah.
And I think that's, to me, the thing I enjoy most and always have enjoyed most is really the crafting of the character, or even, it might be more apt to say the discovery of the character. Like, you kind of come along the road and find, like, of course this is who he is. Like, and sometimes you don't, like with a real person, sometimes you don't know until it's put to the test. And then it's like, yeah, of course this is who he is. And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad, but it is very compelling for me to experience the creation of the character in a lot the same way I would experience the consumption of a character somebody else created.
Yeah, absolutely. We have the Geek Gauntlet podcast in the chat. Hello. He says, "What's up?" And yeah, if you guys haven't checked out the Geek Gauntlet podcast, they are on every Saturday night, I believe at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Really good stuff. They talk all things geeky all the time. Really good stuff. Will Morgan is the head of that. Really great guy. Check them out if you haven't. All right. So now obviously with with these discussions that I'm having with you, one of my main motivations is to try and inspire new and upcoming writers to get out, spread their wings, and work on their own stuff. And so what would you say what would be your most valuable piece of advice to somebody who is just getting into writing and trying to find themselves?
I think there's 2 pieces of advice, and one of them is, I think, more fun than the other. And I'm going to begin with the more fun one. And it's that, for me, from the time I was a little kid, writing began as daydreaming. And I know, we all have to do what we have to do. We have responsibilities, but I think the first thing, if you want to write, if you've got an idea, think about it, work on it, work through it in your head, watch the movie if you can in your head. And that's, it's daydreaming, and it's, maybe don't do it while you're on the freeway. Maybe don't do it when you're, maybe don't do it in the middle of a conversation with your boss, but like when you can, daydream. Not most of writing, for me, the vast majority of writing doesn't happen at the keyboard. For me, the vast majority of writing happens in my head. It happens on the toilet. It happens in lying in bed when I can't sleep. It happens, if I'm a passenger in a car, if I'm riding the bus, I'm sitting and my eyes are out the window, half glazed over, and I'm either looking for an idea or I'm watching an idea. So that's the fun part. The fun part is daydream, and I'm giving you permission. Do it, daydream. That's where your stories are going to come from. That's how you're going to find them. The less fun part is you got to actually write them down. Contrary to my own hopes, dreams, aspirations, and desire, your story will not write itself. Once you've daydreamed enough that you've got something concrete, you've got to put it on paper, and you have to fight the urge to want it to be perfect the moment it hits the screen or the page, because it won't be. It's going to be trash the first time it hits the screen or the page. But the old saying is you can't edit a blank page. So I think you want to daydream, and you want to enjoy that, and you want to savor that, and you want to do it until you can pretty much see the movie in your mind. And that will make it easier to write it, and easier to write with fewer revisions. But you also need to accept that the first draft is going to be bad. And if you don't think it's bad, you're either not reading critically enough, or you're just a flat better writer than I am. And you might be, but you're it's still probably, if it's not bad, it could be better. If it's not bad, it's, it's too short, or it's too long, or your pacing isn't quite right. There's a lot of things to tweak, but you can't tweak them if they're not there. And I think that's, those are the two big ones.
Now, whenever you're creating, especially something new, when you're creating something new from scratch, what's the first hurdle that you try to tackle, or what's the first aspect of your story that you try to build?
It usually depends on where the story came from, if that makes sense. So sometimes, I think I may have mentioned this in the last interview. If not, I apologize. If so, I apologize. It's about to be redundant. Like I have an idea that is very, very freeform right now. It's got no characters, but the idea is like, okay, what if you have like a sci-fi setting that's a pair of twin planets orbiting each other and going around a star, right? And these two twin planets, the way twin planets work, the actual physics of twin planets is that the two sides that face each other are always facing each other. So they're always in the shadow of the other planet. And then the sides that are on the outside are having these long nights while the other planet is facing the sun, the star. Yeah. So I have an idea right now that is just that as a setting. And it's just like, what would happen? What does a society look like if you've got a pair of twin planets where it's almost perpetual darkness for half of each of these two planets? And then these kind of odd, does gravity of the other planet affect you? Stuff like that. And like, there's no characters there yet. There's no plot there yet. I have no idea what's going to happen there. That idea is just a setting. Sure. So what am I going to tackle first? I'm probably going to try to figure out, probably going to continue to analyze the setting until I start to see like, okay, what are the likely conflicts? What are the adaptations you have to make to living in almost constant darkness? And how does that affect the way a society forms? And then you can start to see where there might be some problems from that. And once you've got a problem, then you can have a plot. That's as opposed to if I've got a story that started with a character, then the first thing I'm going to tackle is, okay, well, where is he? But it's sort of, you start with what you have and you work on what you don't have yet, is kind of the simplest answer to that question.
Yeah. And especially with science fiction, it's such a broad and honestly potentially limitless genre. I mean, you could do almost anything with
Mhm.
a setting like that, and especially with science fiction. The most fun about it is the science.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's interesting that you mentioned the gravity of these twin planets, because what that made me think of was did you watch the Loki series?
I didn't. It's on my list. It's on my
Oh,
list. I
okay.
haven't seen it yet.
I gotcha. Well, I'm not gonna get too much into spoilers, obviously, but there's a sequence in there that involves a moon crashing down to this planet, and as the moon is coming down, I mean, obviously that the conflicting gravity is pulling chunks of rock off this moon and bringing them down to the surface of the planet. But once the planet is well within the gravity, or once the moon is well within the gravity of this planet, the gravity just rips the moon apart.
Mhm.
Like Pac-Man opening its mouth, just enormous. It splits right in half, and
Mhm.
it's fun to think about the physics behind that, and that's part of what I love about so much about science fiction, is that you could go as crazy or as not crazy as you want to, and it's probably still within the realm of scientific probability or
Yeah.
possibility.
Mhm. It's also, I think, science is also part of making even like a fantasy world believable. Again, I tell this to everybody. I probably mentioned it in the last interview, but like in Aetherstorm and Saren, there was a lot of thought about real science that went into the magic system of those two
Yeah,
books. I think I brought it up when you were asking about magic
yeah,
systems.
yeah,
But that's real science is how you make the magic feel believable. It's how you make the difference between magic that feels like a hand wave versus magic that feels like it could like it meshes within the world. And
yeah.
I think it's important. I think science is important for science fiction, and I think science is important for all fiction, because whether you know the science behind it or not, your brain recognizes what's realistic and what's not realistic. And it's frequently physics and chemistry and stuff like that that defines what is and isn't realistic.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to science fiction is reading a book by an author who didn't try to learn the science.
Mm-hmm.
It got, I mean, it's kind of it kind of contradicts my statement about you could go almost any direction and have it still be within the realm of scientific possibility, but there is a line that you don't want to cross of, well, now it just sounds absurd.
Right.
And if you don't have that science to back it up, you're going to lose your readers. And I think approaching your magic system with that foundation in real world sciences, I think is very, very smart. Um, then there's obviously hard magic systems and soft magic systems, and that go along with hard world building and soft world building. And I think from what I've read in your Songs of Saren series, I think that you found a really good balance.
I hope so. I was shooting for a balance. Sort of the hard versus soft. And I may have mentioned this in the last interview, but I remember when I was in the earliest stages of drafting Songs of Saren, diving into like the fantasy writing subreddit, where they talk a lot about hard magic systems and soft magic systems, and asking the question of those guys like, hey, what about a squishy magic system? It's got some substance to it. It's kind of hard, but it still has some give to it, and there's not like these explicit rules that are laid out in English, but it still feels like there are rules and consequences. And they were very, very overwhelmingly supportive of like, yeah, absolutely, that's fine. Split the difference. Give us the squishy system.
Now, what are some common blunders that you see in new writers? Like, let's say you pick up a book from a first time author. What are some common missteps that new writers make that really stick out to you?
Um, One thing that I see, and I would hesitate to call it a misstep. I'm going to call it a misstep, but I hesitate to call it a misstep. So a lot of people who want to write a book have a world in mind that's incredibly intricate and detailed, and they frequently are guilty of over exposition in the first couple of chapters,
Yeah,
where they're just very, very excited to share this world they've built, and they go into this extreme detail of all of the things in the world. And there's people that enjoy that. There's people that want that. Because again, I'm giving this as though it's a mistake, but if you crack open the Lord of the Rings, you're going to find that mistake in it. So it's really a style difference more than a blunder, but it can be a blunder. It's vulnerable. It's vulnerable to being bad. It's easy to mess it up when you're just pouring that much world building into the first few sentences, first few chapters, because if I'm reading it and you're a first-time author and I probably received this from somebody, I'm probably going to power through it because they asked for my feedback or something, and I want to give them that feedback, and they're a friend, and I'll be able to tell them what I think. If I picked up that book at the library or off of a Barnes and Noble shelf, and that was what I saw in the first paragraph, I'd put it back on the shelf and walk away. Most of the first time authors I receive work from are not so bad that I would put it back on the shelf. But that's, I think, the vulnerability. I think a lot of people who are, especially again in Reddit, you'll see a lot of people who have drafts that they put out for feedback, and a lot of it feels like they're just summarizing this beautiful world they've built, and it's a beautiful world, and they should be proud of it. But the best way, in my opinion, and I think we've discussed this before, the best way, in my opinion, to do exposition is through characters.
Yeah.
Because 1, it's faster. 2, it's less boring. And 3, that way you also get character development at the same time, so it's more efficient. And it also makes it easier to start writing. You don't need to write a history textbook for your world before you write your book. If you know, like, okay, I've got these 3 characters and they all are, farm hands or whatever that are getting dragged into this, cosmic existential conflict. Well, how much about your world does the farm hand know? Not much. So if it doesn't make sense for the character to know it, then why do they know it?
Right.
And it starts to strain the reader's impression of these characters. If the character sounds like he has a PhD in history in your world, and he shouldn't, that's going to be a problem.
Definitely. So I don't know if you had seen, but this past Thursday I did a Twitch stream, and it's going to be a recurring thing that I do every Thursday morning, where I read, where I'm reading a bad book. Okay. and I'm sitting here, I'm reading it out loud, and every like 3 or 4 sentences, I'm just like, hold up, okay, let's talk about this for a second. And I'm glad that you brought that up. Having characters know things that they shouldn't know. So the way that this author is writing this book, he's writing it from different character perspectives, but he's writing it in the first person. Now, besides all the other errors, like switching between past and present tense within the same sentence, stuff like that. When you're writing in the first person, obviously, there's a certain perspective that your character has that you can't break from. And something that this author did was describe something that this character is seeing, but describe how the character he's looking at is feeling. And that took me out of it completely. Not that I wasn't already, but I ranted about that particular item for about 5 minutes. I was like, you can't do that. Yeah. It's like first person 101. You're in that character's head. That character doesn't know how that character's feeling unless they're telepathic or something.
Sure.
So it's I find it a little sticky sometimes with first person. Obviously there's a very specific set of rules that you have to follow. Now, have you written in first person before?
I have. I'm trying to remember. I've done it several times in different settings. In terms of published work, I want to say the only first person published work I have out is called Forsaken Wrath, and it's part of a series. But the series currently is only one book with planned sequels. The Scorpio Files, and it's sort of my take on like Indiana Jones or the Uncharted series of video games. If you're familiar with those games, it was very heavily influenced by Nathan Drake and Uncharted. And that series, right now just one book, is written first person from the perspective of actually a partner of the protagonist. So the viewpoint is not the primary protagonist, not Scorpio.
Gotcha.
So, and I did that very deliberately because it's sort of like, it's an interesting dynamic that I play with in that one, and it is first person. I think that's my one published first person work.
Gotcha. Now, we were talking a bit about exposition before. Obviously you have to find the balance of, exposition versus show don't tell.
Sure.
And obviously sometimes that balance can be a little bit hard to maintain. So let's say that, your character's in the thick of everything, and you have to write a big info dump, like that, where the character has to learn a large amount of information in a short amount of time. How would you go about that to make that interesting, rather than just have somebody tell that character?
That's actually a really good question. I'm not surprised it's a good question. That is a really good question. I think a lot of times I do just have another character tell them, but there's ways you can have another character tell them where it feels a little more entertaining. Like in Aetherstorm, I'm going to kind of just, no spoilers, but in Aetherstorm, one of the protagonists' name is Luca. And Luca has one job in Aetherstorm. Luca's job is to be dumb. Luca's job is he doesn't know anything.
Yeah.
He's a window. He's the window I show the world to the reader through. So Luca frequently will just, say something or ask a dumb question and stick his foot in his mouth. And then somebody will correct him or somebody will chastise him. And in so doing, you can kind of quickly give some information, and you also kind of get a little bit of a comedic break in there, while somebody, beats Luca over the head with the fact that, no, of course, this is an artisan's shop and not a cake shop, or whatever. And they tell you how and then all of a sudden now the reader knows, and the reader knows really efficiently, and they don't feel like they learned anything. They just had kind of a funny moment, and now they know something about the world. Mm-hmm. And I also just think that's a good device generally. Again, to kind of circle back to like the farmhand doesn't have a PhD in history in your world. And at least, depending, it's a well-worn trope, but it's a good trope of having your protagonist kind of come from nothing and discover this big, thing that's bigger than them. It's sort of the hero's journey. And the really good thing about the hero's journey is your protagonist doesn't know anything, so they can learn a lot really quickly, and it's still entertaining and it's still satisfying. People keep putting their butts in movie theater seats to watch it over and over and over again. And it gives you that opportunity to craft a character whose primary function is to be pretty likable, pretty entertaining, and let you explain things to the reader without seeming patronizing.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes it can be a bit of a challenge to overcome. Having the character learn this information in a way that makes it seem like the information wasn't spoon-fed to the reader.
Right.
There's definitely a difference in engagement whenever the reader is given the information, rather than the reader just kind of passively comes over this information. It goes in the back of their head until when that information becomes relevant later, pops up and like, oh, wait a minute, I knew that.
Right. Yeah, it's a very, very mild Chekhov's gun, where it's like you're kind of, the information's in the room. It's just nobody's been shot yet,
Yes.
And I feel like it works well that way.
Absolutely. So when it comes to not necessarily just writing, but when it comes to reading other stories, what would you say are some of your biggest pet peeves? Like what immediately turns a book into I guess what they call a DNF, or did not finish?
That's also an interesting question. I think for me, it's the technical term for it is pacing. If I pick up a book and it feels like it's not going anywhere, I can tend to check out. And that quote pacing issue frequently takes the form of, as I kind of touched on earlier, that excessive exposition, that kind of little too much world building too fast, or too much of, it's sort of like there's a time and a place to kind of history dump, and sometimes you don't need to tell us at all. Like there's, I have, it's not on this computer, but it's back, on a flash drive somewhere. I have a timeline that is like 2,000 years of history of Saren. And there's like whole wars in there that aren't in any of the books and probably won't be in any of the books. They're just there. Yeah. And that's just for me. And that's for me. And it might get winked at, or it might get talked about in passing in conversation somewhere. So I can keep my dates straight. So I can keep, it's like, you can, to kind of borrow from the Bible a little bit, you can tell the story of Jesus Christ without telling all of the genealogies in Genesis.
Yeah.
And I think, if I'm cracking open a piece of science fiction or fantasy to try to read for entertainment, don't tell me the genealogies. Tell me about Jesus, would be the metaphor. Mm-hmm. If you're going to show me your world's big thing, the biggest event probably in the history of this fictional world, because otherwise, why would it be worth making up a world about it? Right? You're going to show me that event. I don't need to know, necessarily the name of that mountain range. And if I do need to know the name of the mountain range for geographic purposes, it should be as quick as that's the name of the mountain range. It shouldn't be these mountains were formed by the old dwarf gods before the dawn of time, and the dwarf gods made war, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Unless that's plot relevant. And if it's plot relevant, it feel relevant quickly.
Yeah, definitely. And to have that extra information given to the reader, I feel like it should also be given to the character whose perspective you're seeing this story through. In Lord of the Rings, for example, I'll take it back to Tolkien. Gandalf. Mm-hmm. When the Fellowship is wandering and they come across Saruman's ravens, Gandalf says, "We must take the pass of Caradhras," and he didn't go into any exposition about how the pass was formed, why it's called that, what this pass encompasses, where exactly it's going. It's just, we have to go here. And now, if along the way somebody asks them, so how did it get this name? So then yes, that would be, I guess, a relevant time to convey that information. But you also have to, find, again, goes back to balance. You have to find the balance of what information would the reader want to know. Right. What about this specific location is so interesting that you have to give all this information, and definitely make the information itself interesting too, because you don't want your reader to look at this paragraph of, this is why this is the way it is, and they just kind of down to the next paragraph.
Exactly. Like, to kind of take your example, like if you're going through a pass, make the pass interesting. If you're gonna write about it, if you're gonna give it any time at all, other than just they went through the pass, you could have dialogue in that space. There's a lot of things you could do with your reader's time. If you're gonna describe the geography with your reader's time, then make it interesting geography. Make it, why are there, there's faces of men in the sides of this valley, and here's why. These are the mages that carved these faces into this valley or whatever. But if you're just describing the sides of a regular valley and you're doing a paragraph about water erosion, you're probably missing the target.
Yeah, but it's always all about pacing, and it's not just pacing of the story itself, but it's also pacing of the rate at which information is given to the reader. It brings it right back to info dumps. You don't want to throw too much at them too quickly. Because if you tell them, okay, you have to remember these 5 locations, you have to remember these 24 names, and you have to remember why these names are important. Well, suddenly, once those names come up again, they're having to go back to chapter 1 to be like, oh, okay, it's that person.
Right. It's the genealogies. It's like, guys, we don't care.
Yeah.
We don't. Put that in an index in the back or something. You know what I mean? It's at least, that's the way I view it.
And so, what we talked about some pet peeves that you have with writing, but what are some of your favorite storytelling cliches? Yeah, it could be anything from cliches that you find really just irritating and get under your skin, or cliches that you find and you're just like, oh yay, finally another one of these.
One of my favorites, and I haven't gotten to do it yet. I see it on the internet all the time. It's frequently on Facebook as like a Tumblr screenshot. But one of my favorites, it's a good trope, is when the character gets told to leave all their weapons and they dump out like an absurd number of weapons. And then they get told, I said all of them, and they pull out more weapons, and it gets like Bugs Bunny levels of ridiculous numbers of weapons in different places. I love that. I know it's old. I know it's been done. I don't care. Keep doing it. It's good. It's funny. And it tells you something about that character. And you know what I mean? And it's like, if you've got the right character to do that bit with, then by God, do that bit, you know? And it's on my to-do list. It is. It's so good every time. It's funny every time.
Yeah. I mean, it's making me think of, you've seen The Mask with Jim Carrey, right?
Yeah.
When he's apprehended by the police and they're pulling all this stuff out of his pockets like a rubber chicken, bazooka, like just a full bazooka out of his pocket, a picture of the police lieutenant's wife, like all this ridiculous stuff coming out of his pockets, and like you said, well, when you have the character for which a bit is going to work, do it. Just do it.
That's right. And people, I think, there's a lot of concern about originality among writers, especially new writers. And I think it's a valid concern. You don't want to just be ripping off other people's bits all the time. But first of all, sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have the character for that bit and you just have to do it, and you have to do it well, but do it. And also, I think it was an Oscar Wilde, and I probably said this in the last interview. I'm not very original, but it was the talent borrows and genius steals. So steal it. Make it your own, make it interesting, make it fit in your world in a way that's compelling, but steal it. Don't steal trademarks or intellectual property. I can't condone. But if it's a trope or a bit or a thing that you've seen done and you think you could do it better, do it better. Do it.
Now with storytelling, there are obviously different methods to incite your character to do the things that they need to do. A lot of them go with, the dead mentor. A lot of them go with the MacGuffin that everybody's after. The murdered family is always a favorite of mine. It's a good way to very quickly create sympathy for this character. What would you say is your favorite method of, inciting incident? I guess I would say.
I do love a dead mentor. I do. Dead mentor is one of my favorites. Dead mentor is what I used in Aether Storm. It's tried and true. It gets the job done. You can frequently bake in a mission if the mentor had some kind of life's work, or you can do revenge that way, and it works just as well. I love a dead mentor. I also, my background, I'm in law school now, but my degree is in economics. And I love economics. I do. I love realistic economics in completely unrealistic stories, science fiction and fantasy. Mm-hmm. And I say that because, like in Demon Slayer, like one of the inciting forces of a sort of a sub-conflict, but what ends up being a pretty big conflict in the broader series is this economics of magic, where you're magically producing food and where you previously weren't. And then you have to ask the question of, okay, well, what's going to happen to all these farmers? These farmers grew wheat and now you don't need them to grow wheat anymore. What are they going to do? Well, they're probably going to revolt because they're not going to get paid enough for their wheat to live. Yeah. So you can take some pretty boring and pretty elementary economics, and all of a sudden you've got a really big conflict. All of a sudden you've got a war, because that's the stuff real wars are started by.
Absolutely.
Real wars are started more by economics than they are by a kidnapped princess, although they are also started by kidnapped princesses. And so I love a dead mentor if you need something fast for a small conflict of why is this person going from point A to point B. but I also love for, why are these two nations at each other's throats? I love economics. And you don't need I have a degree in economics. You don't need one. You think about it creatively and intuitively, and you can kind of figure out, what's likely to be a source of conflict. Star Wars Episode 1 starts with a trade dispute.
Yes. Yes, the dreaded trade dispute.
Exactly. It works.
It does. It does. I mean, granted, it's not explained very well in the story. I mean, I will say that the novelization does it a whole lot better, and as well as the expanded universe. But yeah, it's a great way to plant the seed of a much larger conflict. I mean, obviously, people had their problems with that. That they wanted to. A lot of people were going into it expecting the whole good versus evil, swing the laser sword and all that. But to weave a political conflict into such a grand universe that's already been built up, it in my opinion just makes that universe seem much more multifaceted. It makes it seem like a real society with these real problems, because you can take that idea and very easily apply it to what's going on here today.
Absolutely. And I think that, depending on your preferred sort of genre, and I mean, I think there's some people who just want to see, good versus evil, swing the laser sword or the regular sword. And, there's a lot of that out there. But I think for what I read and what I write, I like those more realistic conflicts that don't have clean good guys and bad guys. Or if you have a good guy, the good guy is just some guy who got caught in the middle of this bigger conflict between entities that are probably not wholly evil, but are certainly self-serving, and kind of they have their own interests first, and sometimes those interests can hurt a lot of people. And suddenly now you've got a person up against something bigger than a person, or up against a group of people. And I think it can be very compelling. It's very easy to create a likable character when suddenly, they're motivated by survival, the survival of the people they care about, and they're up against this massive, metaphorical or literal machine that has its own interests at heart, and that is just doing what comes naturally to it, whether it's a government or a church or an AI or whatever. And then you can have these incredibly realistic feeling conflicts, incredibly compelling conflicts that are much more nuanced than good guys good, bad guys bad, swing laser sword, and I think if you peel back the surface, especially as it was explained by the prequels and explained better by the novelization of the prequels, admittedly, even the original trilogy of Star Wars, once you have that backstory, is a deeply political story. It's a deeply realistic story.
Yes.
And I think it's important to recognize that, you can write a fable, you can write straight good versus evil, but it again is going to suffer from some of what we were talking about earlier, where it lacks a little bit of realism if people are motivated by I'm good and he's evil, or I'm evil and he's good. And again, because you look at human history, and a lot of the worst evils that were ever committed were motivated by people who thought I'm good, they're evil, so I can do whatever I have to do.
Yeah.
And that's a much more fascinating dynamic to play with than straight good and evil, is have the evil guy think he's good.
Absolutely.
Yes. It's going to be interesting, realistic, and all of that.
Now, I'm glad that you brought up morally gray characters a minute ago. That actually leads into my next question. So, suppose you're writing an anti-hero or an anti-villain. I guess in a lot of ways those two terms are kind of interchangeable. Sure. But do you think that you'd find it easier to write a person who does the right things for the wrong reasons, or a character who does the wrong things for the right reasons?
I'm gonna say that's a coin toss, and I think it's because the characters have different roles in the narrative, and I think a character that does the right things for the wrong reasons is a tremendous amount of fun. I love a character, a reluctantly reformed villain or something like that, who is doing the right thing for a bad reason or doing the right thing kind of unwillingly. They can be a tremendous amount of fun to write and a tremendous amount of fun to read because they're still a villain. They can be funny, they can be witty, they can cut in a way that a pure protagonist can't, and I love that. Mm-hmm. And I also think that when you force your protagonist to make a hard choice, when you take a good guy and make him do a bad thing, that's also very compelling in sort of the opposite way. And so I'm going to say that's 50-50. I love both of those. I love both of them equally. And I think, when they're done well, they're some of the best characters out there. And I mean, you need look no further than Loki or Venom, some of our favorite characters in comics, certainly, but across pop culture, some of the best characters were villains, and they were villains who became good either because there was a bigger evil that was like, whoa, wait a minute, this is where I draw the line, or out of self-interest or coercion or redemption. And each of those is a different story worth telling and worth reading over and over and over again. It's always good. That's another one of my favorite tropes is bad guy does good thing for kind of ambiguous gray reasons, or alternatively, good guy has to do a bad thing for ambiguous or gray reasons. And how do they cope with that? I think it's great and I love it. And I love both of them equally.
So who would you say, across not just, books, but, film and shows as well, who would you say is your favorite antagonist, and how much inspiration have you drawn from them when building antagonists in your stories?
I think, boy, that's also a really good question. I think one of my favorite antagonists, and this is kind of an obscure series. I think it just recently got reprinted again. I've been seeing new covers for it, but there's a series called The Secrets of the Immortal Nicholas Flamel, which is, I think, a 7-book series. I read it when I was in high school. And in it, if I'm remembering the details correctly, there's this sort of interesting dynamic where there's these two twins that are like the chosen ones to save the world or whatever. And the bad guys are like the literal old gods, your Odin, your Quetzalcoatl, etc., from all different civilizations who are immortal and behind the scenes trying to rebuild their old civilization, which is basically Atlantis. And there's an interesting dynamic there where the good guys and bad guys change sides over the course of these 7 books as new information comes to light and as magic happens and stuff happens. And I think my favorite air quote antagonist of that series is called Maratheu, which is like an old word for death in this world. And spoiler alert for the Secrets of the Immortal Nicholas Flamel series, I apologize. The plot twist at the end is that the whole thing was a time loop, and that Maratheu, the villain who was here, there, everywhere, messing with stuff, was actually one of the twins who had this final battle already and started going back in time and messing with stuff to make sure it went the way it was supposed to go. And so it's like a little bit of a Terminator thing happening, where he has gone back in time and fully messed with himself, threatened his own life retroactively, because that was one of the things that had to happen to ensure that the broader antagonists didn't succeed. And it's this incredible subversion where he seems like a bad guy for 7 books. And then it's like, no, actually, he was the protagonist. He was the literal protagonist of the book, just older, wiser, a little more grizzled, forced to do this thankless, timeless work of maintaining eternity, basically.
Yeah.
And it's just, I draw a lot of influence from that series. I draw a lot of influence from that character. I love that dynamic. It does kind of touch back on that, doing bad things for the right reasons or doing the right good things for bad reasons, kind of moral grayness where you've got this, guy who does bad stuff over the course of these 7 books, but he's doing it for the ultimate best possible reason.
I gotcha. That's really interesting. Okay. So people who know me know that I'm not really much of an anime fan. But there are a few films and series that really stick out to me as things that I think are very special. And one of those series is called Fate's Day Night. And one of the characters in that series is what's called a heroic spirit. His name is he's called Archer because he is an Archer class, what's called servant, that gets summoned to fight in this big war. But I mean, so spoiler alert. The big twist with his character is that he is actually the protagonist from an alternate timeline who this protagonist wants to be a hero who saves everybody, doesn't want anybody to have to die, I guess, in an unpleasant way. And this character, Archer, is the protagonist who realized that dream only to find out that what he ended up having to do as a heroic spirit is jump from time to time where all these big conflicts were raging up and just kill everybody who was involved with that conflict. Good, evil, didn't matter, kill everybody. And he was forced to do that for eternity. And so he gets summoned to fight in this war. And he comes across himself basically in the main protagonist. And his goal is to kill him in order to keep that from happening to him.
Right.
And hopefully take himself out of that loop as well. It's a really interesting dynamic that forms between these two characters. It's like, you know, opposite sides of a mirror having to fight each other. And and the character that you just described made me think a lot of that. And it brings it back to, you know, geniuses steal. So
yeah.
So I'm just like, see, there it is again.
Do it. I'm doing it. I'm planning it. Listen, absolutely do it. And do it well, make it interesting, make it your own. But you know what I mean? It's very much that thing of like, you know, those two dynamics are almost mirror images of each other, where you've got the guy who has to go back in time to make sure things go the way they're supposed to go versus the guy who has to go back in time because he wants to try to prevent it.
Yeah.
And there's you know, there's a lot of ways to play with that dynamic, and it's incredibly cool. And it's been done several times, but it hasn't been done so many times that you can't do it again.
Yeah. A lot of writers are kind of iffy when it comes to time travel because on the one hand, if you think too much about it, there are a lot of rules that you have to follow. But on the other hand, you don't have to follow any rules, like at all.
That's true.
Because time travel is such a chaotic subject that you could do just about anything, and you could make it make sense.
Yeah, you can make it make sense. It's, you know, you want it, it has to make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, this is another thing I was going to say, because I thought about it as we were talking about science earlier, is I recently started, I got it for Christmas. I've been meaning to read it for a long time. Recently started The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yes.
Which I don't know if you've read it, but The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy really is like the shining example of the science isn't real and it's self-aware and it pokes fun at itself. You know, the improbability engine, it's delicious. It's amazing. So if you're going to hand wave and just dismiss the science, you know, be funny, be clever, do it well. You know, it's sort of, and that's, I think, the good example of like anything you hear here from me or anybody that sounds like a hard and fast rule. Every rule has exceptions. At the end of the day, the primary objective is that you've written something good and compelling and entertaining and satisfying. And you can break any rule you want if the end result is that.
All right. So we have about 5 minutes left. So what I want to do now is do a bit of a lightning round with you. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, not at once, of course, but I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I'm going to give you 1 minute to answer each question. And obviously, no right or wrong answers. This is going to be purely off the top of your head. So question number 1 that we're going to be starting once the timer hits 30 seconds, and I'll give you a minute right now. So in the next minute, give me off the top of your head a character backstory. So that's something that you come up with right now.
Say king he ruled over this nation. He inherited his power. He had advisors, whatever else, that kind of trained him in the way things were supposed to go. And he finds himself very suddenly displaced by a revolt that he didn't see coming. None of his advisors saw it coming. There's a revolution, and this king was forced to go into exile or into hiding. And he's lost his throne, and he's lost his title. He's lost everything he has, and he has to now survive in this new and dynamically changing world that has effectively just spit him out from where he started.
All right, perfect.
Was that 40 seconds?
Yeah, well, you put a lot of information into that 40 seconds, man. That was good.
Okay.
All right. So question number 2, this character that you've created is suddenly accosted by a group of thugs. How does he react, and how does he act?
He's trying to talk his way out of it. He's probably doesn't have much money to give them. He's got whatever he could carry, and he doesn't want to give it up. He's already lost enough. He's probably trying to talk his way out of it because he's, kind of primarily book educated. He's had advisors, he's had people that trained him, and the people that trained him weren't smart enough to see a revolution coming. So they probably didn't give him a lot of very practical skills. So he's maybe just absolutely appalled at the violence and doing something incredibly stupid. Or he's maybe, if he's smart and he's clever, he's trying to talk his way out of it. Maybe he's promising them the riches that he once had. If they know who he is and recognize him, he's probably saying, hey, I'm the king. I have, as you obviously know from all the revolutionaries, I have all this gold hidden away. That was why you had to try to kill me. Why don't you just come with me and I'll show you some of this gold, and lead them into a trap. That's how he gets out of it.
There you go. All right. And question number 3. So at the end of the story, your character is faced with a choice: the needs of the many versus the needs of the few. Given the information that you know about this character, what kind of decision do you think he would make, and what logic would he use to reach that decision?
I think that decision's a big conflict for him, because on the one hand, you've got the sort of selfish drive of having lost everything and kind of wanting his own power back, wanting his own safety back. And on the other hand, you've got decades of training and programming that say you're the leader of a nation. It's bigger than you. It's about more than you. And I think in that moment, he's probably likely to actually default to the needs of the many. I think he's going to, when the enemy, if he's a protagonist, it's the needs of the many, and he's going to try to do the right thing for his kingdom, even though it's not his anymore. If he's a bad guy, it's the needs of the few, and it's that revenge track of, oh, I've lost everything, I deserve this, and he's doing the selfish thing in that moment. And I think that's, you can write that character either way. That character can be, many or few, and that moment is what defines him.
That's great. You did so good. You packed a lot of information into those 3 minutes, and that was fantastic. I couldn't have asked for it to go any better. That was great. All right.
Thank you.
So yeah, absolutely. So we've just about hit an hour here. So we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. I have been Cam of Cam and Focus. Thank you guys again for joining us, and thank you to everybody who's engaged in the chat. I didn't highlight all of your messages, but Geek Gauntlet, Solo Girl, Just a Disney Geek, thank you very much for coming out and joining us for this stream. I've been chatting once again with Alexander Ferrick. Tell us where we can find you, where we can find your work.
I'm on Amazon is sort of my primary, easiest place to find me. You go on Amazon and you search Alexander Ferrick. I have an author page there. All of my books are there. And I have a Facebook page, Instagram, etc. And if you're interested in my music, I'm on Spotify, Pandora, everywhere music is streamed. The band is called The Whales. And if you follow Alexander Ferrick's socials, you'll find The Whales socials, or The Whales posted there as well. And that's pretty much it.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you very, very much for joining me once again. It was great to have you back.
Thank you. It was great to be back.
All right. Well, thanks again to everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time. Everybody have a good night. And don't forget to follow Geek News Now on Facebook. We're getting close to 23,000 likes, I believe. Subscribe on YouTube. We've broken 1,700 subs, so we're on the up and up. So like us, follow us, subscribe, all that hoo-ha. And everybody have a good night.